I call this Emergency Hawaii Tourism Authority Board meeting to order. And before we start, I'm going to ask John to give us a few of the rules around emergency meetings.
Right, thank you, Chair. I just wanted to explain that this meeting was called under HRS Section 92.8, Emergency Meetings of the Sunshine Law, in Section A. Says if the board finds that an imminent peril to the public health, safety, or welfare requires a meeting in less time that is provided for in Section 92.7, which is the normal 6 days notice requirement, the board may hold an emergency meeting. And to do that, the board needs to state their reasons for doing so, and 2/3 of members to which the board is entitled need to agree that that is correct and that an emergency exists. We did the polling through email this weekend, and thank you for your responses. And we got 10 votes for yes and some pending. I'm not sure if they came in later, but we did have the 2/3 required to hold the emergency meeting.
Thank you, John. And now we'll move to Iliga for the roll call.
Chair Miyasato,
Present.
Vice Chair Paishan Duarte,
Aye.
Member Agas,
Here. And no one is in the room with me.
mahalo. Member Arakawa,
Present.
Member Ching,
Here.
Member Hanneman,
Here.
Member Yona,
Present.
anyone with you?
No, no one's with me. I'm sorry.
Mahalo. Member McCully,
Present and alone.
mahalo. Member Menor McNamara,
Present and alone as well.
mahalo. Member Tokioka,
Present.
mahalo. Member White,
Present.
mahalo. Member Zane,
Aye, present.
mahalo, Chair.
Mahalo. For our opening protocol, we're going to ask Maka to come up and open us properly.
Mahalo, Chair. Aloha kakahia kakako, ka papa alakai. Ina aya kawai ya oi, e inu I kawai. If you have vai near you, e inu I kawai. E kane kawai ola, e kau ola ke ia oi. E lono nui no I kawai, ho kupu, ho eu, ho I nana I ke olai. E ia kawai ola, he vai ola, e ola hoi. E ho mai he au ola, e ola hoi. E eli kapu, eli noa. Ai. Aloha nui kako. That is just one mele, one pule hoi of several pule that some kumuhula on Maui have put together and dedicated for this anahulu, for this 10 moon cycle, to put intentions forward for growth, for life, for prosperity, for our ohana on Maui. With a mana'o or intention of growth and life, we seek guidance from our akua, our aumakua, our kupuna, to help us fulfill the promise of Malama ya Hawaiʻi. Mea mana'o, I invite you to kukako I luna, a na'au makua ke olu olu. Mahalo. Ai. Nā au mākua mai ka la hiki a ka la kau, mai ka ho'oku I a ka hala vai. Na o makua ia kahina kua ia kahina alo. Ia ka akau I kalani. O ki hai kalani. O we kalani. Nunulu I kalani. Ka holo I kalani. E ia ka pula pula o ko Hawaiʻi. E mālama o ko ia mākou. E ulu I kalani. E ulu I ka honua. E ulu I ka pai aino Hawaiʻi. E ho mai ka ike. E ho mai ka ikaika. E ho mai ki aka mai. E ho mai ka maopopopono. E ho mai ka ike pāpā lua. E ho mai ka mana. Nā o makua mai ka la hiki a ka la kau. Mai ka hoʻoku ia ka hala vai. Nā o makua ia ka hina kua ia ka hina alo. Ia ka akau I ka lani. O ki hai ka lani. O we ka lani. Nunulu I ka lani. Ka holo I ka lani. E ia nā pula pula o Hawaiʻi Tourism Authority. E mālama o ko ia mākou. E ulu I ka lani. E ulu I ka honua. E ulu I ka pai aina o Hawaiʻi. E ho mai ka ike. E ho mai ka ikaika. E ho mai ki aka mai. E ho mai ka maopopopono. E ho mai ka ike pāpā lua. E ho mai ka mana. Nā o makua mai ka la hiki a ka la kau. Mai ka hoʻoku ia ka hala vai. Nā o makua ia ka hina kua ia ka hina alo. Ia ka akau I ka lani. O ki hai ka lani. O we ka lani. Nunulu I ka lani. Ka holo I ka lani. E ia ka pula pula o ko ka ʻoana Casson Fisher. E mālama o ko ia mākou. E ulu I ka lani. E ulu I ka honua. E ulu I ka pai aina o Hawaiʻi. E ho mai ka ike. E ho mai ka ikaika. E ho mai ka makamai. E ho mai ka maopopopono. E ho mai ka ike pāpā lua. E ho mai ka mana. E noho kākou I lalo. Mahalo no hoʻi. As a reminder, this mana'o or intention that we put out and we seek support, not just from us here physically, but also from those that we called upon, ko Hawaiʻi, all of Hawaiʻi, us here at HTA, and the names that you called out for your family names, where they're always with us. Mahalo, Chair.
Mahalo, Maka. So we'll start today's meeting with welcoming our newest member, Mufi Hanneman, to the board. Aloha. So I thought before we actually get into the actual discussion, this was already printed, but I'd read the preamble that we put together to kind of describe what we're doing today and level setting expectations. So this emergency meeting of the Hawaii Tourism Authority Board is being held pursuant to Hawaii Revised Statutes HRS 92-8A. The board finds that the recent brush fires in Maui and Hawaii counties have presented an imminent peril to public health, safety, and welfare that requires the board to hold an emergency meeting to determine whether it is appropriate at this time to request the governor to declare that a tourism emergency exists. At least 2/3 of the board members present and online agree that these findings are correct and that an emergency exists. Pursuant to HRS 201B-9A, if the board determines that the recent catastrophic event adversely affects Hawaii's tourism industry by resulting in a substantial interruption in the commerce of the state and adversely affecting the welfare of its people, the board shall submit a request to the governor to declare that a tourism emergency exists. Such a declaration would allow HTA, through its board, to develop and implement measures to respond to the emergency and allow the use of monies in the Tourism Emergency Special Fund for the response if necessary. HTA manages assets that could be brought to bear to assist in responding to the emergency. This includes not only the Tourism Emergency Special Fund, but also HTA's unique experience, partnerships across multiple disciplines, and relationships with government, tourism-related industry, destination stewardship entities, local communities, and community organizations. Prioritizing the use of these assets effectively is critical to HTA's short-term response to the emergency and longer-term implications for the state, its economy, and its people. So that forms the basis for our discussion today. I'd like to keep that in mind as we discuss important details of a plan. Prior to getting into the meeting, just a couple of terms of engagement, if you will. We're going to wait till every presenter is complete in their presentation, and then we're going to go around the room and allow board members to ask questions. So I would suggest that you write your questions down, and then any other comments you want to make, you'll be given the opportunity to do that. In the interest of giving everybody a voice, we're going to hold it to 3 minutes each, and everybody will be given an opportunity to speak. Okay. All right. Let's move into agenda item 4, presentation on the Maui and Hawaii Island brush fires. Daniel.
Thank you. First, before we start, I'd like to thank our HTA staff for being here to set up our operations center and to man it over the period of time. It's been 1 week since we started these activities, and definitely I want to give my greatest mahalo to all of the staff here, and we'll talk about other people that have also supported us through that. But the staff made selfless dedication to show up, to take initiative, to support our residents and visitors here in these islands. So as we talk about our response to the county brush fires, both in Hawaii County and Maui County, we set up a Department Operations Center, which falls under the statewide response of mass care as well as external affairs. So that were our main responsibilities as the Hawaii Tourism Authority within the Department of Business Economic Development. As I mentioned, we stood up the Operations Center starting from August 8th and started, we had 24-hour coverage through the period until August 14th. We also ran an assistance center and was involved in the temporary housing task force. And I'll cover that in a few minutes. As I mentioned, I'd like to, we had our HTA leadership in staff as particularly I'd like to thank our incident commanders, both Kalani Ka'anana and Caroline Anderson, who led our team here while I was stationed at the state EOC. As well, within that, the typical procedures for a DOC is to have our DBED staff in there with DBED director. We also have our GMTs stationed here. That would be USA, HTA USA and HT Japan. We also had the island chapter, Oahu Visitors Bureau in here. Our standards is to have our PR firm to support Ilihia. And we had the additional staff from the research, as well as we had representation for the Council of Native Hawaiian Advancement to support us within the Department Operations Center that was located in 317 on the 3rd floor. Some of the work that was done through the support of all our partners, and I mentioned as the airlines and the hotels, both on Maui and statewide, coordinated the process of the off-island evacuation. That means moving the visitors and residents out of the impacted area of West Hawaii and to the airport, and then getting them into better shelter, either off-island on Oahu, I think someone took Kauai and the Hawaii Island, as well as working with the airlines to slow down the flow and of flights coming in and passengers coming into Maui so that we could have access to the resources here for the residents while we move the visitors into other accommodations so that we can work closer with the residents that had to be also relocated. As you see here, we relocated 241 into Oahu at our access center. The airlines coordinated through the DOC the cancellation of flights, as well as you can see the number for the seats, 15,000. Within the DOC, we also worked with getting needed evacuees from H&L to here at the center. And we worked with OTS, the Oahu, the bus system, as well as Roberts to shuttle people from the airport to this space. And we couldn't have done it with all of our partners here. In the assistance center itself, we stood up a assistance center type shelter up in the ballroom. That's the 4th floor. And in there, we provided assistance of once they got here to find hotel accommodations. Our purpose is more of a transitional shelter to find them more longer term, either in hotel, if they're visitors in hotel space here, or bookings to get them back to their homes. And the American Red Cross helped to lead the shelter itself. We also had state sheriffs here, and all of this coordination could not have been done without the airport support and our other partners, which I'll start to read. As you can see, some of them, like VASH, was stationed here as well to help out with any visitors, providing counseling and support services, help them with amenity kits, clothing, blankets. We had many donations from hotels, partners for towels. We set up a shower system here. And of course, we had the airlines provided us with, in the overall process, they waiver of fees and activated their kokua teams to support the visitors on getting their bookings, getting them to the right place, providing the messaging that we did at both the airport, in flight, as well as down as they arrived through the shuttles, of where to go, what kind of services they could receive. We even had our counselor corps and our local organizations volunteering their time. Some of them stayed 24 hours to help for foreign language and their citizens, to ensure that they had the right letters if they needed to change their visa status or such, in order that they could also exit, as well as provide support and counseling for them. Currently, as of the 13th, we moved the shelter from the convention center to the Ke'ehi Lagoon Memorial Hall. We moved that around noon. So it's a much smaller space, as we noticed that we were having less need. There's still currently 7 people at that location. And right now we have the Red Cross, Roberts, and VASH are there supporting. So again, some of the numbers that we said, we served 241 people here in the multiple shuttle areas, assistance centers. We had overnight stays of over 189, and we also had 28 American Red Cross volunteers stayed over one night because they couldn't get sheltering as they transitioned into their locations on Maui or other places. And we provide shuttle service to 325. Many of them took the shuttle closer in from the airport, closer into Waikiki, but they had already arranged hotel accommodations through a lot of the kokua service and being able to get to the airport airlines. So they got to here, and then they went into Waikiki for their more permanent relocation. Here's some of the things that, just some quick pictures. That's the shuttle up in the ballroom area. And utilization of the public, the Honolulu bus service to shuttle them from the airport to here. We had scheduled service leaving about 20 minutes. At the peak, we were at 20-minute intervals, and then we did an on-demand as people came down to the 2 locations we had in the airport and then the buses would bring them here. We continue to provide that on-demand service right now. Within our DOC, we also handled things such for our ESF 15, which is the external communications. So as you can see, we've taken many inquiries. There have been a lot of inquiries from media, and because much of it is international or on the East Coast, we took them at all hours. There were press coverage, sending out advisories through our own networks, getting the most up-to-date and correct information. It was very important that we worked closely with the JIC, the state information system coordinators, so that we had the correct information from both the state, FEMA, and the county. Many of you saw the Lieutenant Governor's press conference here. And I cannot say how grateful we are of all of the partners, and these are just a few of the ones who had supported us in both our DOC and the evacuation process, and then moving into our temporary housing task force that we're working with DBED on right now. As you can see, many of them, and very grateful that they all dedicated their time and effort. We saw Hawaiian Airlines in Southwest and Alaska, even doing the inter-island evacuations as well, was very important, as well as the hotels with Hawaii Hotel Alliance and HLTA. I cannot say how much the people on Maui stationed in there, such as Lisa Paulson, stationed in the Maui EOC, Sherry Duong from our island chapter, communicating, and of course, Jerry and also communicating with me on the HLTA side and the Hawaii Hotel Alliance, running all of the operations on Maui. Or Hawaii Hotel Alliance. And right now, we're transitioning into this second task force. We still have our DOC, or operating center, up on 317, but we are now transitioning into doing two task force. The first one is the temporary housing task force. And if I could ask Jimmy to do a quick briefing of where we are in the temporary housing task force.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, before I do that, I do want to make sure, because I'm going to have to leave. FEMA and Red Cross is upstairs waiting for me to follow up with this task force. But I do want to let everybody know on this board, and I think I called and left messages or either talked to every single one of you. The staff and the team at HTA, in collaboration with all of the partners and DBED, worked extremely hard. I don't know how Kalani is sitting there, and Daniel, and the team here, because they were working almost 24 hours a day. So thank you guys for all of your work. It was incredible. Isaac, who I don't compliment that much. I mean, your team was unbelievable. Ilihia and Lacey worked so hard to get the messaging out, but the communication room upstairs was a place where we could gather all that information. So the temporary, the transitional task force for housing is it has already started as of Sunday. We were getting people out of the shelters. We didn't want to wait for Red Cross and FEMA, because FEMA normally does it, but the governor wanted to make sure that people were out of the shelter. So we sent our human services team over there. We worked with our hotel partners on Maui and here to get a list of rooms. We have already transitioned, as we speak right now, probably about 350 people out of the shelters. By tomorrow at the latest, Red Cross and FEMA is going to be taking over that responsibility. But the reason that we jumped in is because people were sleeping in tents, and the governor and our team wanted to make sure we got them out. So we did that. I'm so proud of the hotels that stepped up. Many of them, and you know most of them, I can pick everybody at this table does, but Kelly Sanders was the first hotel at Royal Lahaina to take in people, and I'm sure some of you saw the governor with him at the hotel yesterday. We could go on and on and on talking about all the different people. I do know that TS Restaurants is feeding a lot of people, so it's endless, the amount of support. But I just wanted to let you folks know that the plan is we get the people out of the shelter into hotels. Then from the hotels, we get them into vacation rentals, timeshares, so that they can have a stove, so that they can have refrigerator, they can have bathrooms, they can have a yard where, you know, their kids can play. That's the plan. Airbnb has stepped up. Human Services is working that program. Myself and Luke Myers are working the vacation rental program with people who are connecting to our HHFDC transitional plan. And so we're working to get them into some, you know, normalcy, you know, given the fact that these people have, a lot of people have lost everything. So right now that's the plan. And I have to apologize, but the Red Cross and FEMA are waiting for some of the things that we have to do.
No problem. I do want to add, Jimmy, you got to take credit as well. I don't know why you're sitting here as well in terms of lack of sleep. You know, it needs an orchestrator, it needs a leader. You just stepped to the plate and made it happen, and proud to have you on the board, but more importantly, helping us with this, you know, this tragedy.
Thank you.
Mahalo.
Thank you. You gave me chicken skin. Thank you very much.
And again, we're doing this presentation to be in line specifically with the call for emergency action. I just wanted to say how I think all the work that everyone has put in to respond so quickly, but it indicates how dire the situation is, and that we need to continue to move to next steps at this point. As you see, we've done transitioning to temporary housing to support the DBED and the temporary housing task force. And so HTA is continuing to be a part of this process of this first relief and then moving into recovery. And I'm looking for the board here today to continue to guide us and support us as we work diligently in the process here to help to malama ku'uhome, right? Which is not only something that visitors need to do, but also as residents, we support each other and our lands and our people. Mahalo, Chair.
Mahalo, Daniel. I'm going to ask Ilihia to do the honors in terms of going around getting feedback and questions. But before we do that, I want to see if we have any public testimony on this particular agenda item.
Nobody in queue, Chair.
Okay, thank you, Leo.
We'll start with our members on Zoom. Member Agas, anything?
Sorry, no, I have no questions at this time.
Mahalo. Member Iona?
I have no questions, but I would like to also commend the chair, Blaine Miyasato, for his effort and what he did with Hawaiian Airlines, which many of us know you hardly slept either, Blaine. Thank you.
Mahalo.
Mahalo. Member McCully?
No questions at this time, Chair. I'd like to commend the staff for their efforts and wish them the best as they move forward. It's a hard job. Thank you.
Mahalo. Member Menor McNamara?
No questions at this time, and same thing. Mahalo to everyone's efforts.
Mahalo nui. We'll go around the table here in the room, starting with Member Arakawa.
Okay, I I got some questions, so I got 3 minutes, so I'll just throw them out there, and whoever can answer them can answer them. First off, like everyone, commending the HTA staff and all of our partners for picking up the ball, running with it, and also transitioning it to the appropriate agencies after we do the initial follow-up. There's one thing that we experienced in Kauai. We should create a template from this experience, right, for further emergencies. We hope they don't happen, but we should. One thing that we had to deal with the flooding on Kauai and the volcanic eruption in Hawaii Island over the past few years, was they said, where's HTA on the ground? Where's the HTA stuff? Yes, we took care of the ops center here, but maybe next time we can think about sending some of our staff, our senior staff, to the neighbor islands to actually see what's going on the ground. I know the Maui Visitors Bureau was involved, but HTA has overall responsibility for a lot of things. So we should send some of our senior members and maybe even board members to see what's going on the ground, because only then we can make recommendations on how HTA can use its resources to help. Otherwise it's secondhand information. So that's number one. And we learned from the Kauai floods and the Big Island eruption that they want us on the ground. The second thing would be our messaging. And so our initial messaging was, I think it was perceived as don't come to Maui, right? So it has transitioned to don't come to West Maui or Lahaina, right? So we need to work on that, because the rest of Maui everybody's focused on what's happening in Lahaina, but sooner or later, the rest of Maui will be open to tourism, right? So we need to work on that. That's HTA's mission. The third thing is, what I'm hearing from our hotels and businesses on Maui is the staff, the employees are going through a tough time. So to the extent that the hotels, we should reach out, and Mufi probably knows this, and Mike White, we should reach out and see what type of assistance they need for the hotel employees. And they need help with finances, they need help with finding a place to live. They lost their license, they don't know where their insurance is, those kinds of things. So having something in the major hotels are housing their employees who lost their homes. So I only have 3 minutes, so I'm just going right through this bugger. And then also transitioning some of this housing, the transitional housing and things like that. Yes, we jumped in, but it is really the kuleana of other agencies. So at the appropriate time, it looks like we're doing it already, transitioning it. So we need to look at our HTA mission and how we can help and reach out to the hotels and the industry on Maui, work with the Maui Visitors Bureau. And lastly, I understand that from the hotels I talked to, that some of their guests had questions that could not be answered, and they would have really appreciated somebody on the ground from HTA to say, how do I get back to my hotel, or I'm stranded in Kahului, and things like that. So maybe that's the kuleana of the county, but if they're tourists, we got to work with the Maui Visitor Bureau, and HTA should have a plan. Thanks.
Mahalo. I'm going to ask Dan if you have some responses to that. Let's do it that way. So as you ask the questions, just so we don't duplicate as we go around the table as well. So Daniel.
Okay. First off, on the need to be on the ground on Maui. So I was stationed in the state EOC at Diamond Head. So we were closely integrated with FEMA and HAIMA. They wanted us there to then coordinate with the people that we work with on Maui. The representatives of Maui that we got the information with and we worked closely with were both from HAIMA, the governor, lieutenant governor, and also we had our legislators of Senator DeCoit representing the tourism committee providing us with that information, and she went down on the ground to work with that. And we had report meetings, briefings. It was 3 times a day, and then we went down to 2 times a day to keep us in the loop, because they appreciated that we had a coordinated function. They didn't want us, this is from Haima, didn't want us to get in the way, yet worked with our partners and utilizing that network system and training. And I'd like to turn over to Kalani to talk more about both the response that we had, as well as the current resident support that we're working with, both hotel workers and such. But don't mind having Kalani
So
speak
to
first.
answer that question, so it's HTA's position that in an emergency that involves tourists, we're not going to go to the island. We're not going to go to the site.
I think it's
Or we're not going to
depend-
send anybody, right? Is
Can
that
I just,
our
just jump in
position?
real quick? So later in the agenda, we're going to talk about mobilization and the future. You make a very good point around having a plan that you can take off the shelf and dust off. Unfortunately, the early hours of this was I think critical to the response. What we had influence over, HTA mobilized very, very quickly, and then also used the resources, located on Maui. We'll talk about that later. I think at some point we will have a group of folks that can focus on it and come up with a plan.
Thank you. HTA's work was very, very commendable in such a short time. So I'm not commenting on HTA's work and their involvement. It's just in the future, will we consider it, right? So thank you.
Kalani,
please.
So I would add everything from our guidance and our procedures presently don't say deploy on the ground. And I think part of that is because our procedures also cover statewide contractors who are there on the ground. And that includes the Maui Visitors and Convention Bureau in particular, who are there, who man the EOC, who get activated all the time, who understand the partners on the ground and the local Maui relationships. I'll say that, my evening started the night of the 8th and being on the phone with Member White all that night, 2, 3, 4 in the morning, already starting some of this coordination to support them on the ground, but from Oahu. So I think it's also important to note that we made sure we were in constant contact with John Monahan at HVCB Central, and we've deployed other resources to back up MVCB and to ensure that we are providing that support to that team in addition to supporting from here. And so I would just say that we have people on the ground who are under contract. I think another great example is Jessica Lunny Rich here, right? And Vash, who also have people like Janet, who run the Maui version of Vash, who also deploy to the EOC. And so we're covered in a number of different contracts that are in place with HTA during emergencies like this. And then also Jessica and her team here at the Assistance Center. So it's about leveraging the network to make sure that we're covered without imposing additional burdens on island in that exact moment.
Good, thank you. But the governor and US senators and representatives go out there, so they could say they have people on the ground too and rely on them, right? So it's just something we should discuss later. Thank you.
Could I also ask Kalani to talk about the second part, which is the current resident support, including employees and their families?
Yeah, and Daniel, tell me if I'm covering the right parts or not. I just, again, gratitude to all of the businesses, not just hotels, who took care of their teams. Whether it was Trilogy and the boat companies, whether it was them grabbing folks out of the water in the initial response, hotels, airlines, sending cargo, so many others. TS Restaurants, right? Retail guys, I think about Fleetwood's, right? And what he's doing to take care of his team. So anyway, long story short, many businesses supported their teams and staff and then transitioned into what they could do for their neighbors and everyday residents. And so part of the transitional sheltering program that Jimmy and DBED did was essentially in partnership with hotels to ensure that we could create blocks. But I think I first also want to acknowledge that took an immense lift by many partners to get visitors out to free up that space. And part of our initial response was about how do we get visitors out to create that space so that these resources became available for residents and first responders. And so that's a big part of what we did. And if I'm not mistaken, DOT reported to us a lift out of Maui of over 46,000 in probably about a 3-day period. My brain is fried, and so some of the details are getting mushy, but I think it was around 46,000 in that initial 3 days. So now, again, I think Jimmy described it briefly, but the intention is to alleviate pressure in the shelters, move people into something a little bit more stable in the hotels in a little bit of a longer term. I think it was minimum 30 days, I think is what they were looking at initially. And I think some of that's changed and evolving. And so please note that what I'm sharing is evolving also as this response moves on. And so there's that piece. And then the next layer was more long-term or mid to long-term housing for folks. And so, Daniel, is that what you meant?
Also quickly describe
shuttles and
in
all
the
that?
immediate term sheltering in Ka'anapali over the first few days that our lodging partners helped their own people as well as people in the nearby area that had no shelter.
Yeah, if you look on Gov's comms page, there's a video from a gentleman who lost, I think, his family home in Lahaina and is a staffer at Royal Lahaina, and he tells his own personal story. If you haven't seen it, I think it's just one example of many people sharing their stories. I would also say we've been coordinating with MVCB and MHLA and others like Ronnie and Polyad and Roberts to get essential workers in. Because one of the initial things that we were trying to deal with is we had hotel staff and others who had been essentially working for multiple days without any resources, and how do you relieve them? And so part of it was standing up shuttles and infrastructure to get workers in and out that now are supporting a resource to community and first responders. And so that's also been part of our response as well.
And sorry, I'm looking over at John here. We need to keep on the topic, which is establishing whether or not there is a tourism emergency. And so we can get into sort of the mechanics of how we go forward as we move through the meeting. Ilihia?
Okay, moving on to Member Zane.
Mahalo to the staff and Kalani and Daniel and all of you guys for doing what you did. Most grateful for all of that. I don't have any questions right now.
Chair, shall we reserve leadership for last?
Yes, please.
Okay, Member Hanneman.
Well, I want to echo what all of you have said about the outstanding work that was done by HTA. A few years ago, John Monahan and I and Chris Tatum were very much involved in the first stand-up operations center here when we had to deal with the pandemic. So it's not an easy job. So I appreciate all that you've done to get us where we are. And I think kudos to all of you in that regard. I think David Member Arcar brings up some good points. It'd be great to, and I'm sure you already thought about it, there can be some kind of report that could be filed after this is done so that we can all be aware of what the policy is. We're all on the same page. Lessons learned, things that could be done better, and the things that you've done that is very well. I think that would be very helpful to all of us so we can just jump in and be supportive. But I think for the first time around, especially Daniel, with you calling the shots, you folks did a great job. I don't know if this is a time to address this now, Mr. Chair, but my question has to do with messaging. And that's what I wanted to talk about. I don't know if we do this now or we do this later.
It'll come up in the shortly.
Okay,
on the agenda.
Then I'll wait for that.
Okay.
Thank you.
Hello, Member White.
Well, as to the question of whether an emergency exists, I don't think there's any question at all. This is a huge event for Maui. The pain is very real. The losses are unimaginable. The families that have been impacted are going to take a long while before they get through it. But in addition to the HTA staff stepping up, and as Kalani said, very early or into the early hours of the morning on Wednesday, we were working on the messaging. And I think that the thing that we need to be concerned about is that when an emergency happens in a specific area of an island, like when there's an eruption on the Big Island, it doesn't close down Kona, it doesn't close down South Kohala. Similarly, we have to keep the rest of Maui alive with visitors. And I was talking to Jim Kuhn of Trilogy yesterday, and as Kalani mentioned, they rescued 50 people out of the water that night. They got one of their cats was the last one to leave the harbor before all the other boats burned. Anytime anything happens, like on other islands, companies like Trilogy step up to the plate without question, without hesitation. So it's to those folks that I take my hat off, because they've made a huge difference in the very early stages of what's taken place. We had boats coming from Molokai with supplies and generators, had boats coming from the Big Island, planes coming from the Big Island, landing at Kapalua. So this is just, the emergency teams from the government side take some time to get mobilized, but these individuals stepped up in a way that is so commendable. To the point of the messaging, though, as I called Jim Kuhn to find out, what are your future bookings looking like? And he said, Mike, they're gone, because everyone was told Maui is closed. So I have no bookings. I have a number of employees who have lost their homes. I don't want them to lose their jobs as well. But if I don't have jobs for them, they're probably going to move to the mainland, and I'm not sure I'll get them back when we need them, when we start being able to reopen. So I just, while we need to be very, very sensitive to what's happened in West Maui, we need to remember that the rest of Maui is still able to continue to work and support those with jobs or with funding or with something, or with housing. The rest of the people on Maui stand ready to work. We can't just simply forget that the highest ADR hotels in the state are in Wailea. They're untouched. They're ready to operate. But speaking to one of them yesterday, they've lost 95% of their business for August. September is trending exactly the same way. October, similar. It's because the message went out that we're closed and don't come to Maui. And that's, it's probably the right message to say at the time, but it needs to be said with a caveat. Give us 2 weeks, give us 2 months, give us whatever. It has to be said with a sense that the remainder of the island can still and should still be able to operate. So from Maui, I of course can't speak on behalf of everybody, but you hear little things here and there that didn't go exactly right. But overall, everything is working really, really well. And I think we have to take our hats off to the governor for his efforts. He's been amazing in my mind. Mayor Bisson, for being brand new at the job, doing an amazing job as well. And unfortunately, both of them are having to learn as they go, but they're quick learners, and their support is extremely well done. The airlines are helping out. The hotels are stepping up and housing people and feeding them without asking any questions. And as Jim Kuhn said, I'm spending my own resources, and I have no problem doing that. But at some point, those resources are going to dry up, and I'm not going to be able to do anything more. So I don't know that there's any PPP type loans to cover payroll. I don't know if there's any other kinds of grants coming that can help the small businesses on Maui, but there's a huge level of hurt. And we've got to figure out how we can help make sure that Maui overall is healthy so we can take care of those that are most wounded at this time. Thank you, Chair.
Mahalo. Thank you, Chair. Thank you, everyone. I'll just say, I have a question, but I would just like to say thank you, not only as a citizen or a people of Hawaii, but a person of Hawaii, but I grew up in Lahaina. My mom lives there. We have 800 employees there. We lost our first restaurant. So when I say thank you, I really mean thank you. I didn't talk to my mom for 2 days, but I got her to Oahu. So thank you, everybody that's been helping. I have other things that I think are more pertinent to other parts of the discussion, but one that came up in that I think works for this is, I was in Maui yesterday. We chose, because we do have strong leadership on the west side, we chose as leadership here not to add to the resource draw on the west side. So we did not try to get to the west side, but we wanted to meet with our employees and anybody that was on the other side. And it was great. We had over 200 people turn out in Kanaha and just be able to ask us questions and feed them. So that was great. One of the big questions that I get or have been getting is, as the hotels start to take shelter or people in that lost their houses or displaced, some of the information, which I don't know if it's the right information, is that you need some proof of your house loss, or you need to have had a renter's insurance, things like that. None of those do I know to be true, but those questions were asked to me, and I feel unqualified at the moment to say, no matter what, you're going to be able to get a place. Up until maybe yesterday, the day before that, we did have some people that were trying to get in, but because there was communication about having the reserve rooms for FEMA and for workers, that we were having a little difficulty getting some people in. The hotels and everybody have been great, and I can say that because I have people on the ground that are communicating to me that they are, but there is some confusion. There is some people that have English as not their first language, so when you hear something, how do you interpret it? But I think that would be my main question is what would be the procedure or the requirements to get shelter in one of the houses, and is it available as of today? Thank you.
Just a quick response, and then we can get you more information through the task force itself. But they should first go the triage or assignment of housing, and there's lots actually set aside for residents already. Go to an American Red Cross supported shelter. We have Human Services and Health there doing the triage to identify the rooms that they can go to. They're given the instructions on how to get there, and they have the information on entering in and finding appropriate accommodations for them. So it's American. It has to be an American Red Cross shelter because we're working through with them, which are the major ones that the county are recommending at this point. And Kalani can add a little bit more.
And then I would add, I think some of what's being worked out is the TSA. It's the Transitional Shelter Assistance Program that gets stood up by FEMA. And so I think the most important thing is that folks are registering with FEMA for their disaster ID, because that disaster ID becomes the thing that moves them through all the FEMA available services. So if they haven't registered for their FEMA disaster ID number, I would recommend that they do that. They can do the download of the app is one way, and it's available in I want to say 8 languages primarily initially right now. And I know that they're working to add more capacity for other languages. And so those two things I would say first. One of the things that I think is important for many visitor industry staff is we have many team members and neighbors and community leaders who are COFA residents, right? And so the programs available to them under COFA are different. And so we've been working to meet the gap there. And so that's where I think some of what Jimmy and the transitional program that the state is doing is to ensure that none of our neighbors are left behind. And then ensuring that we also pair people up with the FEMA program as well. And so those are some of the things that I think are important for us to consider in this industry, and knowing many of our team members are in those and are part of those communities that are part of us.
Okay, David, just quick one. Those two things, excellent information on the Red Cross shelter and registering for FEMA. How do employees get this information? What's the mechanism to get that information to Dylan's employees or the hotel employees right now?
Well, can I just ask, and then thank you, that's a good additional question. I wasn't clear if this was pertaining to Red Cross and shelters on the Kahului Wailuku side of the island, or because I would say a rough guess, because we fed 300 of our employees on the west side at one of our restaurants yesterday. So my guess is we have about 400, between 400 and 500 employees still on the west side. And I know the shelters have been moving around. So do we know, because if that's the way for them to get this process started, where the Red Crosses are exactly on the west side? And then we, fortunately, were able to get a Starlink to our restaurant. So that's where we're trying to get people there to like download an app but to this, to this day, I mean, most of my guys on the west side have to go to like, little perches to call us and get service. So it's getting better, definitely. But some of those ways, and I know there's a phone number, I know there's all of those ways, but a lot of it deals with cell and internet connection. So I think when you have somebody that is English as their second language or third, and they don't have, a laptop or iPad and a cell phone, to try and get them into a shelter, I think is where or into a hotel is where we're probably finding the most difficulty. So I still have people in cars. So that I think this is great. I kind of would at some point and maybe not just me, it's at, Civic Center and it's at this place. And if you don't have internet, you can still do a handwritten form or whatever it may be, would be very helpful.
Yeah.
So,
I'd like to stick to the agenda. There's going to be an opportunity to talk about resources.
Sure.
And I mean, this is the next agenda item. So if you don't mind, we're going to move on. Vice Chair?
Yes, thank you. And thank you, everyone, for providing your rich input. And aloha to you, Dylan. I did not realize that you were raised in Lahaina. Aloha to your family. Yeah, the only comment that I have is I think, when we're trying to be a command center, I think what would be also helpful is if we can create, as we are learning about all the various services that are being provided and executed upon or planned for, if we can come up with an emergency matrix of contacts and services, that way we don't have to, it's just going to eat up a lot of our time to provide all of the information. And I think that's what I'm taking away from this conversation, is that we need a mechanism for which to communicate. Here are the various, we receive a call, inquiry about where can we get information, where can we get support. We should not be the solution for all needed services, because that is not our charge. However, we should be cognizant about all the other departments, agencies, private sector partners on the ground, supports, and we can help to redirect folks to the appropriate channels with the contact, with some forms, perhaps with websites and so forth. So that's my only just kind of recommendation, thinking about how do we move even a little bit more efficiently And with that, I just want to thank again all of our awesome staff, and to all the leadership, not only here as HTA, but certainly Maui County and state, and all of our Maui ohana and communities that are the everyday heroes that we're not hearing about.
Aloha, and thank you for that request. So I'll address it actually in Agenda 5 item, how we've been communicating with the industry to provide them with our industry partners with the information that they can then take down to their employees and their partners on the ground. We'll cover it in Agenda 5.
Okay, that's great. Okay, so we're going to move on to the next agenda item, which is a discussion and/or action on HTA resources related to disaster response. So a lot of the commentary that we've had so far and questions, I think, have to do with that portion of it. I'm glad that we've established, it's no surprise that we have a tourism emergency at hand here. And so now let's talk about the resources that are available to us in response to the emergency. Daniel?
Mahalo, if we could share screen again. So as we set this up, there's two parts to our presentation in section 5. One is establishing that there is an emergency. I don't want to make a supposition, even though I know we've already heard discussion here that most believe there is, and we had the polling at the beginning. But we'll give you some layout, some of the other critical data so that everyone can make an informed decision. And then we will also talk about our plan so far and what, when we talk about resource needs, you'll see some of what we've been doing and what we plan to do in very high level, because the discussion today is not for the planning of the emergency, but to establish that there is an emergency and our emergency needs. Oh, sorry, we're a little technical difficulty again. Oh, we have two little screens. Well, we just fast forward it to the next slide. Thank you. So I'll just go through a few things. So relating to communicating with our industry, which is our responsibility, both in the very immediate term and our longer term plans. Kalani, if you can talk, since Ilihia is working on this, talk about our industry communications that we did throughout the process and our intent going forward.
Yeah, thanks, Daniel. Aloha members. So obviously trying to stay in touch with as many folks as we can to understand, see, feel, sense what's happening, try to lean in and anticipate needs for those folks has been our primary focus in this initial response. Many of the partners that we're hearing are obviously doing everything that they're able to do to kokua our residents. And so I think it's inspiring to see aloha in action. Sometimes aloha as a word gets thrown around kind of flippantly sometimes, but in the days that have passed, I think it's showing by example what it means to Malama and what it means to aloha people. I also want to say we've taken a few steps that I just want everyone to be aware of, including in making sure that we've called together our global marketing teams to ensure that they're aligned and have the latest information as a conduit of information to our visitors, making sure that we've updated things, our assets across our marketing channels. We've paused all marketing, both locally for DMAPs as well as others, to just not crowd some of that space and ensure that stations and outlets have the space to get critical information out at this time. We've also updated our guidance. We're on advisory number 4. A huge shout out to Ilihia and the comms team and the JIC and all of those participating to make sure that these communications are going out. We've updated gohawaii.com with information about the wildfire and the alerts and where they can get the latest information to make sure that HTA's site is a resource of accurate and trusted information to help dispel some rumors and also just to ensure that we're providing accurate and clear information to folks. We've also updated the Lahaina page, the West Maui page, member listings, calendar of events, the Go Hawaii app as well. Obviously, we've updated our PR and media sites, travel trade and MCI and Meet Hawaiʻi sites to ensure that, again, all of this information is pointing back to trusted and clear communication, and then removing things and content that's no longer relevant or not appropriate at this time has all come down. That includes updating our digital asset bank of over 13,000 still images where we've archived images that we feel are no longer appropriate to make sure that partners don't have access to those photos to use inappropriately during this time. And so we've made sure that we're also monitoring social media, and we have our contractors monitoring sentiment, tone, and conversation around those. I get daily reports across our GMTs to monitor what happens and what's happening and what's being said by whom. Again, all with the purpose of making sure that we're monitoring the impact and effect that this disaster is having in our lane, right, in particular. And I know sometimes it's not a popular conversation to have, but it is us as a state agency charged with strategically managing tourism to think about these things. And so we are. We've also been pushing out information from other government sources and other relevant sources, like a number of them, HLTA, HHA, MHLA, like the whole alphabet soup of acronyms, and just making sure that that gets out. And then again, working with our other agencies to, what's the right word I can use? I guess align and synchronize our messaging, adding additional clarity. I think in the beginning, our initial messaging was one, and that we're over a week out, that messaging is starting to shift and get more narrow. And you'll see changes like in the 5th emergency proclamation where the governor has clarified that it's West Maui and non-essential travel to West Maui. We've begun to add in parentheses behind that the towns or cities and communities that make up West Maui, because I think a challenge for visitors abroad is they may not understand what West Maui means. And so we're trying to provide information, actually working with Anthology and the Bureau right now to put together some maps so that there's some visual representation that people can reference as we do that. So that's all I have, Daniel. Thanks.
Mahalo. And as you can see, this is above and beyond our normal staffing and resources. So that's a clear indication of our emergency and emergency needs. So I'll go on to some of the economic issues. Oh, yes.
I just think because we're going to continue to be focused on salvaging West Maui and the like. We don't want any tourists going into the areas. In addition to outlining those areas that we're saying are kind of taboo for now, we also need to indicate, like the governor has done in his message, places on Maui that are open. And if you have a confirmed reservation, or confirm your reservation before you come, I really think that's important, because we have to strike that balance. And I think Mike alluded to it in his comments, and I've said that publicly also. It's got to be a balance. We want to salvage Maui and everything that's happening there, but if Wailea shut down for business, my goodness, that place is just going to crumble overnight. And federal funding is very different now. During the COVID period, it was to keep people at home. Right now, we want federal funding to put people to work. So I would just like to add that to the messaging.
I think as an agenda item, this was designed to inventory the resources available to us, to the HDA, and then to utilize those resources for the very same reasons you're pointing out. And I think, so it was meant not to be so much report carding as much as here's the resources we have. So I'm just going to quickly touch on that. We have the Convention Center, we have HVCB, we have CNHA, we have the Anthology group that does all the communications. We've got the various hotel groups and airline groups that are here and represented. And those are all the resources available to us as the HTA, and that's what I wanted to sort of highlight. And then, talk about how to utilize them most effectively. I think communication is a really big piece of that. And so I think in terms of, we can continue with the resources here, this slide you have, Daniel, but then I think then we move to the next, so give people commentary, but the plan is to utilize those resources to address all the questions and issues that are coming up.
Add one more, our consultants, right? Our consultants, Japan, Australia.
Right, I think that's, you have that on there, yeah.
The GMTs listed there.
Yes, please.
So I just wanted to do again the economic impact, following up on Board Member Hanneman about the overall impact to the state. So DBED already did their analysis, and you can see on a daily basis, this is 8.5 million in revenue loss statewide, and a loss of 10,000 jobs over a period of time. And specifically, the first one was about business operations. So businesses are closed right now. There could be more businesses closed, I think in his estimate, but not being operated on Maui as well as statewide. There's a reduction in visitors itself that can't go to the area, and estimating that there will be some loss based on confusion if the messaging is not done correctly. Of course, there's damage to property. I'm just listing all of these things to indicate that there is a vital emergency, a tourism emergency. The Star Advertiser reported through AccuWeather that they estimate total loss of 8 billion to 10 billion over, I think, the next year. And that is based on not only direct loss from visitors, but even when hotels are hosting residents and say FEMA or HAIMA workers in their hotels, and they're getting paid through FEMA or state funds, you're actually losing the visitor spending, right? They would have had higher rates. If visitors were in those rooms, they would have had higher rates. They would have utilized activities and attractions in their period. So there's a loss, that's a tourism loss, right, that we're having. So even though there's some, as Board Member Hanneman had mentioned. And then also, we also had some statements from the article, that Jack had mentioned that he's getting cancellations, and we did polling some of our other industry partners, and Kalani can talk a little bit about that in a little bit. And that, Tony Marie Davis had mentioned that A3H already on Maui itself has lost a third of its members, and they're quite a large association, have sustained some damage or loss and aren't able to operate, as mentioned that Trilogy is losing their business as well. Quickly here, so what this just listing is showing, the first column has the resources we talked about, as Chair had mentioned, and this is showing how we're going to be using some of the resources, just very high level, that just in the immediate center, our staff still needs to support the assistance center that will close on Wednesday and transition out. We're having ARC and Oahu Human Services and such deal with any other visitors that are left. As I mentioned, we have 7 left. There is, if you see later, we are actually having support. The governor has asked us to utilize the building as well for some of their needs and cabinet level needs. And as well as in the short term, we have those 2 task force, both the temporary housing task force, and of course, as DBED, we are part of the economic recovery task force, and they will still be stationed upstairs in our DOC, meaning we would need to have staff participate in supporting both of these. And then our midterm staff itself internally will start to work on industry recovery, supporting businesses that were impacted, as well as developing and training and providing technical assistance of and maybe even retraining of and workforce development, because there will be some businesses that won't be able to come back, and their employees will need to start to work. And we will help them to find the resources, put them in contact. We will also starting to work on what federal funding specifically tourism, federal funding recovery monies can be available, and that means working with our congressional staff as well. So, and then once we have plans, and the board will be involved in the longer range planning, that we start to implement that. So as you can see, there's an emergency need from our staff to support all of these, as well as through our contractors and partners, such as yourselves, in that support. I'll move on. Just as a background, in the 2009-2010 recession, well, 2008 through 2010, we did not actually tap into the Tourism Emergency Fund. Instead, the HTA at that time allocated 10 million in Marketing Opportunity Fund. Some of the activations that happened, they did market saturations in the West Coast, as you can see, LA, San Francisco, Seattle, Portland, Chicago, and Dallas. And actually, we did the West Coast twice over the period between 2009 and 2010. We also did one activation in Japan. And besides the in-city activations, we also had multiple co-op opportunities with airline and wholesalers during that time when we had a critical need as a tourism recovery. And some of the other things that we did in the 2018 with the Hawaiʻi floods and then the Kilauea volcano eruption, here are some of the things that we did and other what we felt were tourism critical needs time periods. However, we did not tap into that tourism emergency fund. So I'd like to leave it at that point. Maybe we can unshare so we can have discussion, please.
Sorry, we're going to open it to discussions, Eligio.
Can do. We can start on Zoom with Member Agas.
I think there are some good questions that David did bring up. You know, as a board member, I think we were trying to do what we could and still trying to figure out what more we can do, right? So I think messaging is important, right? So I think we just got to figure out what is that right messaging and what I have to be honest, what was the expectation of me still too, right? I mean, I'm doing what I can in my role, but what more could I have done, right? And I think those are some of the questions that we continue to ask ourselves.
Thank you.
Mahalo. Member Yona?
I'm sorry. I didn't hear anything that happened the last few minutes because I was on a call to the mainland of people that are trying to help feed our people in Maui. And when that time comes, I'll share what happened. The most amazing thing just happened. So I'll share it at that time. Thank you.
Mahalo. Member Menor McNamara?
Thank you. I just have maybe a question or comment on the economic loss per day slide. I think, we're still gathering information as to how many businesses have been impacted. And then, right here, direct job loss, 10,000, that's significant. So I don't know if it's pertaining for this topic, but, maybe Dylan can provide more feedback as to what is there, besides the federal support that they're giving to the residents, is there anything more? I'm sure there's more, but what we can do, business community can do to support the employees right now, because they pretty much lost, some of them lost everything, right? And for them to eventually transition back to the workforce, what are the immediate needs that we can help with, as well as establishing that pipeline so that eventually they can go back to work? But maybe it's not for this topic itself, but just wanted to put it out there.
Mahalo. Moving to the room now, Member Arakawa.
No comments. I made no comments.
Mahalo. Member Zane?
I guess one of the things that I feel is the perception from the local residents. And in this messaging, when we talk about our losses of the income from the tourism and stuff, is that sensitive to their places right now? I know that we have that kuleana here to keep this economy going, but at the same time, we do have this responsibility to our residents, our local people. And in this time of losses, for them to see that we are still saying we're losing this much because of this incident here. I don't know if that's being sensitive to them. And I think that we need to be very careful in that messaging that yes, we take it to heart of how you feel. And so I don't know, I have really mixed feelings on that, how we are saying we're losing this much, we're losing that, and we're losing this, but at the same time, they've lost everything. So, I think that we really got to be really careful in that, because at the same time, we are not in a good standing with many people. And yeah, I think that we really need to be very careful of how we address this messaging.
Mahalo. Member Hanneman?
Yeah. I wanna focus on the federal funding side. And Kalani, you and I had a conversation yesterday about this. I really think it would behoove HTA to be very proactive on that front. We have a wonderful congressional delegation, but traditionally, all governors have always hired a Washington rep, a consultant. Mayors have done that. I'm not saying we go and hire one, but I think we have to really look to turn over every stone, especially from the standpoint of businesses that are going to have a hard time recovering. So I'm already starting to look at commerce. I sit on the Tourism Travel Advisory Board in Commerce to see whether we can access money out of EDA, what have you. But I think it just behooves us at this time to kind of think outside of our box, and rather than wait for the governor or DBED to say to us, there's this federal fund. If we can find it, we all know people in DC. And our pal in DC, Evelyn. I mean, we should just reach out and say, hey, what's out there? Because other cities have gone through this. And they've tapped into it. And I've always thought that this was a missing piece. And so I would really like to help us be more proactive on that, especially now it's known throughout America how much we've suffered. Everybody's heard about it. So I think that there'll be a lot of empathy for what's going on here, especially if we can qualify for those federal funds.
Mahalo. Member White?
To Member Zane's point, were we expecting to use any of that information for broadcast, or was this just internal?
The few slides we had, it was just for this meeting, for the board to establish that there is an emergency situation in tourism emergency. I think we had mentioned before, the purpose of the meeting today is the board has to determine the tourism emergency and then send a request to the governor for the governor to actually declare a tourism emergency before any additional action from the board can take place in terms of utilizing the emergency funding as well as creating a tourism emergency plan.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for that clarification, because I totally agree with Member Zane that we need to be very sensitive. So thanks.
Sorry, I just need to clarify. This is, for me, we're talking about resource, right? This is the discussion about resource. Okay. To maybe just answer, I know Sherry mentioned, I know a lot of the people that I just met with, they were looking to see when they can either work or get paid. And that's what was, even the people that lost their house, that was a big question I answered the other day. But if on the resource side, and this is, I don't know how it could have been done any better, but in this case, in this scenario, as we talked, there's, you know, hotel, there's, you know, the convention center as resources. And in this case, my team and our organization is a large resource in that area. And how to pull us in, because, you know, I'm not just gonna, you know, call the governor, or, you know, everybody's busy. And I don't know how it could have been, but if using us as a resource, because we have manpower, expertise, and knowledge of the area, and we did that, but splintered, right? Not coordinated, you know, maybe here, where I can say, we're feeding people in Napili, and there's 1,000 people. So I think as just one organization, one resource to this board and to the tourism, if we could have gotten pulled in earlier, we could have done probably a little better, and just to keep that in mind in the specific areas. Thank you.
Member Agost, you had your hand up earlier. No? Okay, Vice Chair.
Yes, thank you. I'm in agreement with Member Hanneman that we need to aggressively look and proactively look at how do we request what federal dollars are available to us, and request them and make sure that it lands in the appropriate channels. Also in agreement with Member Zane's and Member White's mana'o that we need to continue to be sensitive in our messaging. I also have, you know, friends and family on Maui, and they are particularly sensitive to tourism activities. So we just need to continue to work on strategic communications. And then my what I'd like to offer is if we can also look at our resources that we are going to access via the fund, the emergency fund, and then also, you know, coordinate, collaborate to bring in additional dollars and non-monetary resources to Mr. Ho'opi'i's mana'o. He said, basically, he broke it down to two major phases, right? It's first, it's relief, and then it's recovery. So I just want to encourage us to also think about resources to be allocated towards the midterm and longer term rebuild and recovery efforts that will take years. Mahalo.
So I echo that, Vice Chair, and I've been struggling also with the balance and the timing. And so the way I've sort of squared it away for myself, on very little sleep actually, is you know, the concept or the value of Malama and Ho'okipa, and in the first phase focused on, you know, our families, and focus on people and who you know, Kamaina who live there, and you know, everybody has a role to play. I think the role of the HTA board is to focus on the sustainability and viability of tourism as it relates to employment, as it relates to economic health, and so that's our charter, and that's what we're here to do. And but I do feel very strongly that, as Member Zane has pointed out so eloquently, that we do that from the perspective of the people who are suffering immediately. And so, you know, I'm proud to be a part of this board. Everybody obviously cares. We feel a huge, Vice Chair and I were just talking earlier about the huge kuleana we feel to do the right thing and to make the right decisions. And that's why we have a board that's made up of people with various backgrounds and focuses that I think we can address this. And we're going to move on to voting here in just a second, or we're going to put a motion up for voting, and then we'll talk about how to harness all the resources available to us as the board, and how to ensure that we maximize and use those resources for good. So,
Sorry, Chair. One thing that came up is that I think we all recognize that among HTA's duties or responsibilities one of the major ones is our employees, right? And so that is first and foremost. And so we talked about that, right? We talked about having some place where the employees can go to have things explained to them, how to get their FEMA card, how to get their insurance, all of that, how to fill out forms. So that's first and foremost, helping our employees. But in addition to that, I'd like to add another resource. And New Orleans went through this, right? And there are other areas of the country that went through these types of disasters. So to the extent we can work with FEMA, or it maybe is not our Juliana, but we should be part of it because of our employees are affected. We should not have to recreate the wheel here. And so we should take a look at major US disasters. And New Orleans comes to mind because that just wiped out entire areas that have not been repurposed or fixed even now. So let's look to that. If that's a resource that the state can look at, and if we can look at the Tourism Authority in Louisiana to see what they did and how they did it. The rest of Louisiana was open for business, right? So let's, to the extent we don't have to recreate the wheel, let's ask FEMA and our congressional delegation for information that can help serve as a resource. We're talking about resources, right? Thank you.
Mahalo, Member Arakawa. Okay, we're going to move on to item number 6 on the agenda, and that is discussion and action requesting a tourism emergency declaration from the governor pursuant to HRS 201B-9A. So I'm going to make a motion that the HTA board shall submit a request to the governor to declare that a tourism emergency exists.
I second that motion.
Okay, and then we'll have discussion. And we'll do it the same way. We'll start with Ilihia, if you could call folks.
Member Agas?
No questions.
Mahalo. Member Yona?
No questions.
Mahalo. Member Menor McNamara?
No questions.
Mahalo. Member Arakawa?
No questions.
Mahalo. Member Zane?
No question.
Mahalo. Member Hanneman?
No questions.
Mahalo. Member White?
No questions.
Mahalo. Member Ching?
No questions.
Mahalo. Vice Chair Paishan Duarte?
No question.
Back to you, Chair.
No questions. Let's take the vote. Oh, I'm sorry. Is there any public testimony on this agenda item?
None on this item, Chair.
Okay, let's take the vote.
Chair Miyasato?
Aye.
Vice Chair Paishan Duarte?
Aye.
Member Agas?
Aye.
Member Arakawa?
Aye.
Member Ching?
Aye.
Member Hanneman?
Aye.
Member Yona?
Aye.
Member McCauley is excused. Member Menor McNamara?
Aye.
Member Tokioka is excused. Member White?
Aye.
Member Zane?
Aye.
Motion carries, Chair.
Mahalo. Okay, let's move on to item number 7, discussion and action on creation of a disaster response permitted interaction group. And actually, we're going to take both agenda items 7 and 8 together. Discussion and action on the assignment of board members to the disaster response permitted interaction group. So this is designed to, first of all, before we do that, I'm going to ask John to explain what this is.
Well, just to remind everybody about permitted action groups and what they are under the Sunshine Law, board is allowed to put together a permitted action group that doesn't apply, or that the Sunshine Laws or a portion of them, especially notice and some other things, don't apply to, so that they can investigate or do a scope of work that the board assigns to them in a more expeditious manner. And it kind of involves 3 board meetings for it to go through its process. The first is to assign members and define the scope of their assignment, whether it's an investigation or helping to figure things out. And then a second meeting, that group would come back and report to the board. And a third meeting would be necessary for the board to take any actions based on those recommendations. And the permitted interaction group itself can be assigned by the board, basically the members, but it has to be less than a quorum. and other people or entities can be put on that group as well. And that group in its meetings or otherwise is free to, ask other organizations or people for information, advice, etc. But they're just set up to do the investigation and report back to the board. And the transparency is in those board meetings, and if possible, the group should be as transparent and as possible as it goes through its process as well.
Thank you. So the discussion is around the creation of a disaster response permitted interaction group. And the intention of forming it is in direct response to, the current crisis and emergency, but also to, glean lessons learned and have a plan that we can utilize going forward. To cover all of the, not just what's happening, but also the best use of the resources that are available to the Hawaii Tourism Authority. So that's the purpose of the group. And what we'd like to do is, do we vote on, I'm sorry, I apologize. Do we vote on the formation and then we vote on the members, or is it all? What's the mechanics of it? Sorry.
You can define both the membership and the scope of its work and do the same motion to approve that.
Okay. So now that we've described sort of the purpose of this particular group and underscored the resources available to this particular group, let's talk about the formation of the group. And so I'm going to turn it over to Vice Chair.
Thank you, Chair. So Chair and I had a discussion about the various skill sets of our existing board, our present board members, and we have some recommendations that we would like to put forward for our discussion today. So we have 6 members that we have thought of. We would love for you to consider serving on this disaster permitted action group in consideration of the folks that we wanted to, put their names forward. We wanted to make sure that there were Maui folks that are represented here, actual residents of Maui. We want to make sure that there's expertise from our industry, whether it be hotel, whether it be destinations and so forth. We wanted to make sure that we had also expertise from other neighbor islands who actively respond, who work on the ground, helping to coordinate responses in this way on neighbor islands. And we also wanted to make sure that there was representation from our business community to help coordinate across both, government partners, business partners, nonprofit partners. And also some legal expertise. We definitely need a legal mind to help us navigate through the different potential pitfalls. So all that said, here are some names we would like to put forth for our collective conversation and discussion. Member White, Member Hanneman, Member Iona, Member Sherry Menor McNamara, Member Arakawa, and myself, Mahina Paishan Duarte.
Okay, so this is a motion to requesting a motion to form a disaster response permitted interaction group with the members Vice Chair mentioned, and also the scope of their assignment based on that description. Okay, discussion? Ilya?
Hearing no discussion, Chair Miyasato. Oh, sorry. Jump the gun there.
Mahalo.
Member Goss.
Is this, we're asking us if we have questions, or we're not voting, right?
Yes, discussion.
But I actually support the group. I think you can utilize the rest of us also for anything else that you may need. I think you organized a great one. I think, Mahina, a good one would be, you know, when Sig brought up the question regards to, you know, just the residents, it's a good mix of talent on here. Mufi knows how to use the resources of the hospitality industry, and he's got all of us supporting that as we serve on other boards. So I think this is a great utilization of talent from our board.
Mahalo. Member Yona?
I think this is a good move to make for everyone. I think that the people on the committee will already have past experience in handling disasters. And I think we can make a big difference. So I really support this 100%.
Mahalo. Member Menard McNamara?
No questions.
Mahalo. Member Arakawa?
Mayor Hanneman and I had experience on the City and County Emergency Operations Center. So you had 8 years or more. I had 8 years. So thank you very much for the consideration.
Member Zane?
No questions.
Member Tokioka? Mahalo. Member Hanneman?
Happy to serve. Thank the Vice Chair for assembling this group. We're all in this together. So I just want to make that real clear. Thank you.
Mahalo. Member White? Mahalo. Member Ching?
No questions.
Mahalo. Vice Chair?
No questions.
No questions. Let's take the vote, Lydia.
And just noting that no discussion online on this topic.
Mahalo.
Chair Miyasato.
Aye.
Vice Chair Paishan Duarte.
Aye.
Member Agas.
Aye.
Member Arakawa.
Aye.
Member Ching.
Aye.
Member Hanneman.
Aye.
Member Yona.
Aye.
Member Macaulay is excused. Member Menard McNamara.
Aye.
Member Tokioka.
Aye.
Member White.
Aye.
Member Zane.
Aye.
Motion carries, Chair.
Mahalo. Okay, the meeting the emergency meeting is adjourned. Hold on. Member Iona, did you have comments you want to make?
Yes, I didn't know when it would be appropriate, and I'm sorry I had to get off the call, but you'll all understand why in a few minutes. One of the things that a lot of us did is we during, and I know Sukano was listening, we did a lot of emergency relief for Anna, brought food in on boats, did all kinds of stuff. But the one thing that we did was we were able to network very important friends that had reach. And what Mr. Hanneman shared was the out of state reach. So calls were made over the weekend, and I need to commend Chad Buck from Hawaii Food Service Alliance. I have to tell you that he's used to bringing stuff in and people like us on the ground, giving it out to people during COVID. We did that a lot. During Haiena, we did it even more, and also in Kaloa. But what we learned is that we couldn't forget about other sides of the islands that were in trouble. So I want you to know that a reach was made by the governor to Chad Buck to assist with everything. And he has donated and moved 1 million pounds of food in the last 4 days into Maui. He has been the one that picked up with all the containers, the stuff from the capital, people donating. You have to understand that there are containers sitting because there's no place to take them. But there was a man, a very, very wonderful man by the name of Dr. Joseph Penbera, Penbera. And he runs an association that helped with Katrina. He was able to organize philanthropy support from all over the country. And we asked him to stand down. And the reason for that was we wanted to be sure we had the right message. So what we said and what we're really good at, and Dylan, you're right, we have to feed people. That was the most important thing as our culture is we have to feed people. And that's all we're going to focus on as far as our group is concerned. So Chad Buck, Alex Sualoon Farms, Mercy Chefs, which was an organization that doctor told us about, and we reached out to them. They prepared 5,000 meals since Wednesday for Lahaina and the volunteers. There is another organization, I believe, being led out of the Maui Community College. So what happens is they are going to be bringing in 9 to 10 containers every 2 weeks into Maui. We found out that Maui Land and Pine, Darren was going to, as the season ends, agriculture, let's go people. We told him to maintain the 8 people that were to be laid off Friday. They are to keep them because we are going to use Maui Land and Pine as the holding area for all the food that's going to be coming in, as well as whatever area that can have it, because there's no place to put it. Bear Hawaii is willing to use their warehouse to hold goods like generators or air purifiers or whatever. They cannot hold food. And of course, you all know Shansui had all the capital items delivered to his location at Mahi Pono. This man took Chad Buck on radio today to a radio station called iHeart Radio that reaches 160 cities across the United States. Chad Buck gave the most unbelievable, incredible information on what is going on the ground in Maui. That iHeart Radio, during a break, called in and told them that iHeart Radio will be making a very significant contribution to this cause. They also said that all their stations across the United States in their network will replay this broadcast and will be on iPodcast, which I'm supposed to get one in 4 hours, on Saturday and next week, reaching out to people where to give money. So Kalani, when you help me get the information I needed, and I'm going to tell you it's going to the Council of Native Hawaiian Advancement, all the money raised by these radio stations have been told that's where the money should go. So I'm hoping that with Kuhio Lewis and the organization, that they will understand that things that are needed by the people, we were guaranteed that that would be the organization that would help the people of Maui. We are going to feed these people through Mercy Chefs. We're going to bring in food from agriculture. Chad Buck is looking with Vandersloot and other people to bring in beef from all their farms. We are going to be bringing in produce from Ulun and helping Ulun. And Ulun contacted Brian Miyamoto today to see if they could get a container in the water by tomorrow. So as we talked about what we need to do, it's so important that we need to feed the people, bottom line, and not for a month, but until as long as they need it. These men and people across the United States have offered containers of oranges, fruits, vegetables, food, whatever is needed for Hawaii. They will work with the governor and you, Jimmy, and of course, Senate President Kochi, on how to make this work. So as you guys were talking about this important message, and Mufi, you brought up the reach. These men are made up of former Secretary of Agriculture from Obama's administration, people who know how to access FEMA. They helped Katrina. So I want you to know that they are and have been reached. So I think the disaster committee can now have a good start. I don't know how much iHeart Radio is going to give, but if you figure it out, they're going to go through 160 cities. It's going to be pretty significant, I think. And that is what our group will be doing and reaching out to these people. They have access to Biden and in fact, when I told them that we didn't know how we could bring in the food and Chad Buck was concerned, I want to tell you that they called somebody and they said, oh, don't worry about that. We'll get a plane to bring it in. So I need you to know that that's what we do, right? As people, as we sit on this table. And Dylan, you were so right. You fed so many people. I heard what you did. And Dylan, I cannot imagine watching your beautiful restaurant burn, what that must have done, because I know I ate in it a lot of times. So we explained to them that we needed to feed the people and they're all behind us. That's what their message was, feed the people. By that is money. And they intend to be with us until people are back in their homes. So I want you to know we have done the outreach already. And thank you to the governor for reaching out to Chad. He was the first call the governor made, and Chad has not disappointed Hawaii. And I need to thank Chad Buck because he's who helped us during Ha'ena. Thank you, Sukanoho. I know you're on the phone. And you sent Kauai teams to Maui to help them. Kalani, I think you know that, right? I guess the Kauai disaster relief went to Maui. So what I need to say, that was my good news, because he was calling me that the radio broadcast had just completed and it was extremely successful. So that was my message. I thought we could all leave in a good place.
Absolutely. Mahalo, Member Iona. I'm super pleased and excited that you're on the team. You've all of the members that are named, not just aloha, but also relevant experience and focus to this. And as mentioned earlier, the rest of us who are not on the committee are here to support you in any way you need. And again, appreciate all the energy and malama and aloha that you're all bringing to the exercise. With that, we're going to ask for a motion to adjourn the meeting. Second. Okay, meeting adjourned.
Thank you.